A Quiet Place Part 2 is a horror thriller directed by John Krasinski starring Cillian Murphy and Emily Blunt. The events of Quiet Place Part 2 take place immediately after the first Quiet Place. The synopsis of this movie is, following the deadly events at home, the Abbott family must now face the terrors of the outside world as they continue to fight for survival in silence. Forced to venture into the unknown, they quickly realize that the creatures that hunt by sound are not the only threats that lurk beyond the sandpit. Now, as a whole, this movie, I would not say is better than the original Quiet Place, but stand is equals to each other. In terms of horror and thriller, excellent job around the board. The only problem I have with this movie is the dialogue. What? Now, granted, it was in the big screen. A lot of people actually couldn't understand what they were saying, but once it comes out on disc, that won't be a problem because, well, you have subtitles. Throughout the movie itself, the suspense and horror was phenomenal. Sometimes the horror was very predictable, while at other times it was completely unprecedented. And I won't lie, sometimes it caught me off guard.
And not a lot of horror movies do that.
So, spoiler alert.
To anyone who hasn't seen it yet, if you haven't, I highly recommend you do. It is a very good movie, but
The movie itself has two different stories. One being the deaf girl, and Cillian Murphy, who plays as Emmett, and Emily Blunt, who plays as Evelyn Abbott, and Marcus Abbott, who's played by Noah Jupe. And the baby, but I don't really know what the baby's name is. So Reagan Abbott, who's played by Millicent Simmons, they tried to find safe haven for the whole family along with Cillian Murphy, who plays as Emmett. At first, Emmett doesn't want to do her idea because he's lost all hope. He lost his family. He doesn't want to do anything because, like I said, there's no hope left in the world, according to him. Reagan Abbott actually finds that there are people who still exist based off of a radio, or I believe the song is Somewhere Beyond the Sea.
Nemo, basically, that's where it comes from. The ending of Nemo. Just think of that. That's where it comes from.
She finds out where it's being broadcasted. She writes it down on her map, and she goes to find it by herself. While Noah Jupe says, you shouldn't do this, she does it anyways because, well, that's just her character. She doesn't care. She caused enough problems in the first movie. It's time to redeem yourself, you know? So once she leaves, Emily Blunt asks Cillian Murphy, or Emmett, so to speak, to go find her. He does. He says, you gotta come home with me. She's like, you have a chance to do things now. Let's get it done. They go and find this dock with boats, because the island that the thing is broadcasting from is apparently a safe haven, like I said. They get to the island, they broadcast everything around the world, the ringing hearing aid, I believe, the hearing aid, and all's well and done. Now, for Emily Blunt's side, at first I thought there were 3 stories that went along with it, when in fact it was actually 2. Emily Blunt and Noah Jupe,
or Marcus and Evelyn, however you want to put it,
they go to Emmett's farm, or I wouldn't say farm, his home, quote unquote, and ask for safe haven because they blew up their home from Quiet Place. And from there, they went and tried to survive the best they could while Emmett was gone and her daughter was gone. And I guess it's very weird to me because if she was that gung-ho about getting her daughter back, why wasn't she freaking out as often as I thought she would? But that doesn't matter.
I'll talk about that later.
So that happens, and they have to fight off, the monsters from the first one. Nothing's changed in terms of monsters. They're still the same. There's no alpha, weird ear, I don't even know what they're called. The weird, aliens. There's no alpha alien. Nothing like that. They're still the same. That's not happening yet. So, and in the end, the movie ends the same way it did the first one, only more epic. Overall, I really, really, really did like this movie. I highly recommend you go see it. It's definitely worth the watch, for sure. And I like how towards the beginning of the movie, they gave you a little backstory of how everything happened. And also, spoiler alert again, Emmett and Lee Abbott, played by Cillian Murphy and John Krasinski, are actually friends. That's how, they know each other in the movie later on. And, it's a heartfelt kind of thing. Throughout the movie, the emotional state, the suspense state, and the horror state are all consistent. There's not one scene that's out of place or one that I would put elsewhere. It all was perfect. The camera angles, all of it, the music is what really did it for me. The suspenseful music as it crescendoed during some scenes, you would think to yourself, well, yeah, I know what's going to happen. There's going to be a jump scare. But actually that wasn't the case. Sometimes that was the case, but the pros outweigh the cons in terms of horror thriller, what happened, where, and when. I have to say, even though there was talking in this movie, it still matches the the first one in terms of suspense. Very crazy, I know, because if it was mostly talking the entire time, would you really be able to call the movie A Quiet Place? I don't think so, but they did it perfectly. John Krasinski as the director, absolutely amazing. I loved it. I've heard so many good reviews on this, and once I went to go see it, I agree. All of it good. And of course, they left the end open-ended because why not? It just makes sense. The cons I had with this movie, very few, but they're still there. In the first movie, they mentioned the government, but in the second movie, that's never mentioned once.
What?
They played a big part in it to begin with, but I guess not anymore. Maybe because the government's been disbanded and they don't know what to do. So I guess that makes sense, or maybe they'll introduce it more in the third movie.
I don't know when it'll come out. Maybe John Krasinski will direct that one as well.
I would love to see it because he's doing a very good job. The acting as a whole, amazing.
I should have mentioned that before.
All of it good. You could literally feel the emotions most of these, like, all the people had throughout this movie. All of it. And I love that about a movie. If a movie can pull that off, you know it's going to be good. Another one of the cons, like I said, the dialogue. The dialogue was a bit iffy. I'm not saying as a whole it was iffy, it's just I couldn't understand it. Like, it was fluent English, but I couldn't understand it. But once the DVD comes out, or Blu-ray or whatever, and subtitles show up, then we'll be fine. That'll be a con that's gone. But as it stands right now, I didn't fully understand what they were going for. Where they will go in the next movie, I could not tell you. I want them to elaborate more on the aftermath or the, like, where they go next, because I still feel like they didn't get very far as a whole in this movie. I understand Safe Haven that exists now, but it wasn't Safe Haven for very long because one of the creatures got on the island and all hell broke loose. So that's a problem in itself. I also want them to elaborate more on the government aspect, because it can't just be relied on the main character's family. It has to also, how do I put this into words? It also has to focus on, you know, ending the entire thing, you know, coming full circle and wrapping up the entire series, if you understand what I mean. Because just ending it the exact same way over and over again, it doesn't really get anywhere. I'm not saying the ending was bad. Do not get me wrong. It's just, you gotta wrap it up at some point. That's a necessity. And another thing, towards the beginning of the movie, there was like whenever the backstory happened, apparently the main family, John Krasinski and Emily Blunt, they already knew how to deal with these things. They saw it once and said, you gotta be quiet. Which doesn't really make sense, because in the first movie, it took them a while to realize, so they're affected by sound. But on day one, when it shows in the movie, they already know. But it's not that big of a deal, honestly. I mean, I guess it makes sense. Like I said, the pros outweigh the cons in this movie.
So I'm just gonna leave it at that.
If I could give this a rating, overall 9.7 out of 10. Honestly, like I said, suspense and horror, phenomenal. Just like the first one. They did not disappoint. I loved it. The pacing was also good. The acting was also good. This movie is amazing in its own right. It is. It gives you the same fear that you had with the first movie, only a little bit more amplified. Although, technically speaking, maybe a little bit more dumbed down, because you know what the creatures look like. You know how they act. But in the first one, you didn't know what they look like. You didn't know how they act. So you couldn't even tell. And there were some parts during the movie where the suspense was just so high, it's like edge of the seat kind of thing. And then some were like, okay, I know what's gonna happen. Either this is gonna happen once, this is gonna happen once, or it's gonna happen at the exact same time. So honestly, it was amazing. So that's all I've got for A Quiet Place Part 2. If you haven't seen it, like I said, go and watch it. It's definitely worth your time, and I will see y'all later. Peace!